I feel the weight of my 70 years as I hold this faded photograph. My trembling hands can barely keep it steady, marked by decades of working the land in Fairfield, Kansas. The wall clock slowly marks each second of my birthday, which I spend alone in this oak chair that belonged to my mother. In the photograph, Robert smiles beside me, with our 3 small children in front. We were happy, or at least, I believed we were. Tears blur my vision, but they're no longer tears of despair. They're of acceptance. Before continuing with the story, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are watching from. Your help is very important. I grew up hearing that a woman should be silent and servile. My father, Joseph Miller, was a man of few words who woke before sunrise to work in the wheat fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Mary, he always said, in this life there's only hard work and prayer. Mother would nod silently, her hands always busy with some task, kneading dough, mending clothes, or canning vegetables from our garden. Their marriage was a practical arrangement, like most in Fairfield. Love was a luxury few spoke about. The kitchen in our farmhouse was where I learned my place in the world. By 12, I could cook a full meal, wash laundry by hand, and tend to the chickens without supervision. School was secondary. Practical skills were what mattered. I still remember the smell of fresh cornbread mingling with the dusty scent that always hung in the air. Kansas dust gets everywhere, in your hair, under your nails, between the pages of the few books I managed to read in secret. I treasured those stolen moments of imagination, dreaming of places beyond our small town's boundaries. Now, sitting here on my birthday with no one to celebrate it, I realize it's time to tell my story. Not for anyone else, but for myself. To understand how the dutiful daughter, devoted wife, and selfless mother ended up alone in a borrowed house at 70. Perhaps in telling it, I might finally understand who Mary Thompson really is, beyond the roles I've played. The Fairfield of my childhood was a place where everyone knew, not just your name, but your family's history going back generations. The church bell would ring on Sundays, and the entire town would gather in their best clothes. Mother would spend Saturday evenings ironing my only good dress, a blue cotton one with tiny white flowers. I'd watch her methodical movements, the iron hissing as it pressed the fabric smooth, while she hummed hymns under her breath. I was 15 when I first saw Robert Thompson at the county fair. Tall and shy, with calloused hands and honest eyes. He didn't speak much, just like my father, but his smile made me feel something I couldn't name back then. He'd won a ribbon for his prize corn, and I was helping at the church ladies' pie stand. Our eyes met as he bought a slice of apple pie, and he stumbled over his words as he thanked me. For weeks afterward, I'd find myself looking for him whenever we went into town. "You'll make a good wife someday, Mary," my mother would say as she taught me to bake cornbread and canned vegetables from our garden. I never questioned this future. In our small world, a woman's worth was measured by how well she served her family. The thought of doing anything else never crossed my mind. College was for the wealthy kids from Topeka or Wichita, not for farmers' daughters from Fairfield. Robert began to court me properly the following spring. He'd come to our house on Sunday afternoons, sitting stiffly in our front room while my father interrogated him about his farm and his plans. He brought me wildflowers once, hastily picked from the roadside. I pressed one between the pages of my Bible and still have it, flattened and colorless now, but a reminder of when possibilities seemed to stretch before me like the endless Kansas horizon. Yet even then, as my heart quickened at the sight of him walking up our dirt road. I couldn't articulate what I truly wanted from life. I knew only what was expected: marriage, children, a home to tend. The women in my family had followed this path for generations. Who was I to dream of anything different? We married when I was 19, in the same church where I'd been baptized. Robert was 23 and had inherited a small piece of land from his uncle. The ceremony was simple, attended by the whole community. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit my smaller frame. As the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, I felt both a sense of completion and a strange emptiness I couldn't explain. Our first home was a modest 2-bedroom farmhouse that needed constant attention. The roof leaked when it rained, and the wind whistled through cracks in the windows during winter storms. But it was ours, and I threw myself into making it a home. I hung curtains sewn from feed sacks, planted flowers around the porch, and kept everything spotless despite the ever-present Kansas dust. Robert worked from dawn till dusk, just as my father had. At night, he would collapse into bed with barely enough energy to kiss my cheek. We rarely talked about anything beyond the practical matters of running the farm, the weather, the crops, the livestock. Sometimes I yearned for deeper conversation, for someone to ask what I thought about things. But that wasn't Robert's way, and I'd been raised not to expect such indulgences. Our first child, Joseph, named after my father, came a year into our marriage. Sarah followed 2 years later, and then Michael, our youngest. With each birth, another piece of the young girl I'd been slipped away, replaced by responsibility and routine. I loved my children fiercely, but motherhood consumed me entirely. There were diapers to wash, meals to cook, clothes to mend, and endless cleaning. The sound of their laughter was my reward. The sight of their healthy bodies growing strong under my care, my only measure of success. Robert was a good provider, but a distant father. He'd ruffled the boys' hair or bounced Sarah on his knee, but he left the real parenting to me. "You've got the touch for it," he'd say, as if raising children was some natural talent rather than exhausting work. Still, we were secure, if not exactly happy in the way the magazines described. We had enough to eat, a roof over our heads, and healthy children. By the standards of Fairfield, we were doing well. The decades blurred together in a haze of repetitive days and changing seasons. Spring planting gave way to summer heat, then fall, harvest, and winter's bitter cold. Year after year, I rose before the sun to cook breakfast, packed lunches for the children, tended the garden, preserved food for winter, kept the house, helped with the farm books, and fell into bed exhausted every night. I wore my dedication like armor, never complaining, always putting everyone else's needs before my own. Our children grew tall and strong. Joseph inherited his father's quiet determination and skill with the land. Sarah was bright and curious, always with a book in hand, a trait I secretly encouraged, slipping her novels from the town library whenever I could. Michael, our youngest, had a quick wit and restless energy that sometimes reminded me of dreams I'd long since buried. Robert and I settled into comfortable familiarity. We knew each other's habits, could predict each other's thoughts, but rarely ventured beyond the safe territory of daily concerns. Sometimes, washing dishes at the kitchen sink, I'd catch myself wondering if this was all life had to offer. But such thoughts seemed ungrateful, selfish even. We had more than many, a prosperous farm, healthy children, respect in the community. When Sarah announced she wanted to attend college in Topeka, I supported her quietly, despite Robert's reservations. "What does a woman need college for?" he'd asked at dinner. Before I could speak, Sarah had answered, "To be more than just someone's wife, Dad." The words stung, though I knew she hadn't meant to hurt me. Was that how she saw my life? As just a wife? The question haunted me for months. Joseph took over part of the farm operation when he turned 20, bringing modern ideas and equipment that increased our yield. Michael left for Kansas City after high school, finding work in construction and sending money home faithfully each month. Our house grew quieter. Robert and I rattled around in it like two strangers, with less and less to say to each other. We'd built this life together, raised these children, worked this land, but something essential had been lost along the way. Or perhaps it had never been there at all. Robert's heart attack came without warning on a clear autumn day. One moment he was checking the combine. The next he was clutching his chest, falling to his knees in the dust. Joseph found him and called the ambulance, but it was too late. Just like that, after 36 years of marriage, I was a widow at 55. The funeral brought our children home. Sarah flew in from Chicago, where she'd settled after college with her husband and 2 daughters. Joseph was already running most of the farm operations by then. Michael drove in from Kansas City, looking older and more serious than the laughing boy who'd left home. They stood beside me at the cemetery as the pastor spoke words of comfort that didn't reach my heart. Grief is a strange companion. I missed his steady presence, the rhythm of our shared life, but I also felt a disconcerting sense of freedom I couldn't acknowledge, even to myself. For the first time since I was 19, I answered to no one. The farm belonged to me now, though Joseph handled most decisions. I could eat what I wanted, when I wanted, sleep late if I chose, read for hours without feeling guilty about neglected chores. This newfound independence lasted exactly 8 months. It was Sarah who brought up the subject first, during a phone call. "Mom, we've been talking about your situation," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The farmhouse is too big for you alone. It's not practical." By we, she meant my 3 children, who had apparently been discussing my future without me. Joseph suggested I move into the small guest house on his property. It would be easier for everyone, he explained when they all visited for Easter. Michael nodded in agreement. "You're getting older, Mom. What if you fell and no one was around to help?" Their concerns seemed reasonable on the surface, practical, like everything in our family had always been. But beneath their words, I sensed something else. Convenience. My presence in the main farmhouse complicated Joseph's plans to expand his operation. My independence disrupted their image of me as the aging mother who needed their protection and guidance. "I'm perfectly capable of living on my own," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I've been running this household since before any of you were born." But my objections fell on deaf ears. Within weeks, I found myself relocated to the guest house, with only a fraction of my belongings. The rest were divided up or donated, without much regard for my attachment to them. The justifications were endless. The main house needed renovation. I would be safer with family nearby. It would be easier for me to manage a smaller space. What no one said aloud was the truth. I had become inconvenient. The guest house arrangement lasted less than a year. Joseph's wife, Linda, had never particularly warmed to me, viewing my presence as an intrusion. Their children treated me like a stranger, someone to be greeted with dutiful kisses but otherwise avoided. The beginning of the end came when Linda decided to start a home business. "We need the guest house for her studio," Joseph informed me one evening, not meeting my eyes. There's a nice apartment complex for seniors in town, but the nice apartment complex was clearly beyond my modest widow's income. I called Sarah, hoping my daughter might offer an alternative. "We just don't have the space, Mom," she said, regretful but firm. "With the girls and both of us working, it's not practical. Michael's apartment is barely big enough for him." It was Pastor Williams who offered a solution. The church owned a small house near the town center, previously used for visiting missionaries. "It's not charity, Mary," he assured me when I hesitated. "You've given to this church your whole life." The day I moved in, none of my children came to help. Joseph had a farm emergency. Sarah couldn't leave Chicago. Michael had work commitments. I stood in the empty living room, a single woman in my 50s for the first time since my wedding, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of my life. That night, I finally allowed myself to weep, not just for Robert or the farmhouse, but for Mary Thompson, the girl who had disappeared so completely into the roles of wife and mother that even her own children couldn't see her as a person with needs and feelings of her own. The missionary house was small but solid. After the initial shock wore off, I began to see possibilities in its empty rooms. The kitchen was outdated, the wallpaper peeling, but the bones were good. Like me, it had been neglected, but not broken. For the first time, I painted walls the colors I wanted: soft blue in the bedroom, buttery yellow in the kitchen. No one questioned my choices or reminded me that we've always had white walls in this family. I arranged furniture to suit myself, not around a husband's recliner or children's play areas. I planted flowers in the small garden patch, bright zinnias and marigolds that seemed to mock my earlier despair with their cheerful faces. The town watched with curious eyes. Most had known me all my life as Joseph Miller's daughter, then Robert Thompson's wife. Few had ever thought of me as simply Mary. Loneliness was my constant companion. I'd wake at night reaching for Robert, only to find cold sheets beside me. The silence in the house sometimes seemed to have physical weight, pressing down until I'd turn on the radio just to hear another human voice. It was during one of these lonely evenings that I heard an announcement about art classes at the community center. "No experience necessary," the friendly voice promised. "All ages, welcome." I almost laughed at the thought. Me, taking art classes. What would Robert have said? Art wasn't useful. It didn't put food on the table. It was frivolous, a waste of time. But time was the one thing I had in abundance now. The following Tuesday, I walked into the community center, clutching my purse with white-knuckled fingers. A gray-haired woman named Eleanor greeted me with a warm smile. "First time." "Don't worry, we were all beginners once." With trembling hands, I picked up a paintbrush for the first time since grade school, and something inside me, something buried beneath decades of service and sacrifice, began to stir. The community center became my sanctuary. Tuesday evenings were for painting, where Eleanor guided our small group through the basics of composition and color. My first attempts were hesitant, still lifes of fruit that looked more like colorful blobs, landscapes with questionable perspective. But there was freedom in creating something that had no practical purpose, something that existed solely because I wanted it to exist. On Thursdays, I joined a beginner's guitar class taught by Frank Winters, a retired music teacher. "Music keeps you young," he'd say, teaching us simple chords and folk songs. My fingertips grew calloused in new places, different from the farm work calluses I'd worn most of my life. I met Doris at the painting class, a widow like me, but one who'd embraced her independence with gusto. Married 43 years to Harold, she told me. Loved him dearly, but I've lived more in the 5 years since he passed than in all those decades of marriage. She wore bright scarves and dangling earrings, and had recently returned from a bus tour to the Grand Canyon. You should come to the senior center with me, she urged. They have dance nights on Fridays. Nothing fancy, just folks our age, remembering how to have fun. So I found myself, at 61, stepping hesitantly into the Fairfield Senior Center. Howard Jenkins asked me to dance, a widower with thinning hair and kind eyes I vaguely remembered from high school. Nothing complicated, he promised, just sway to the music. That night, moving awkwardly to Moon River, something shifted inside me. The woman who had defined herself solely through others began to recognize her own desires, her own potential for joy. My small house gradually filled with evidence of my new life: paintings, guitar, music, novels Doris recommended. When Sarah called, I had my own stories to share. You're taking guitar lessons. Really, Mom? The note of disbelief in her voice stung. I always wanted to learn, I told her, a simple truth that felt revolutionary as I spoke it aloud. The turning point came during a rare family gathering for my 65th birthday. Sarah had organized it, insisting that all 3 children and their families come to Fairfield to celebrate. I suspected guilt played a role. 5 years had passed since they'd moved me out of the farmhouse. 5 years of building a life they knew little about. They arrived expecting the same passive, accommodating mother they'd always known. Instead, they found my house transformed. Bright paintings hung on walls. Books filled shelves. A guitar stood in the corner. The dining table was set with mismatched vintage china I'd collected with Doris, not the practical everyday dishes I'd used on the farm. The place looks different, Michael commented. It's very you, Mom. I nearly laughed. How would he know what was very me when I was only now discovering it myself? Lunch was awkward until Doris arrived with her peach cobbler, bursting in like a colorful whirlwind. Her ease broke the tension, and conversation began to flow. After dessert, Sarah helped me clear the table. In the kitchen, she spoke softly. I've never seen you like this, Mom. You seem happy. I am happy, I admitted. Not every day. I still miss your father. But I'm finding my way. I'm sorry about before. Moving you out. We thought we were doing what was best for you. No, I said gently. You were doing what was easiest for you. Sarah, I spent my entire life trying to be what everyone else needed. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask what I needed. And what do you need, Mom? This, my own space, my own choices. Friends who see me, not just roles I play in their lives. That conversation opened a door between us. Sarah began calling more often, asking about my artwork, my friends. Joseph invited me to family dinners without the weight of obligation. Michael sent me watercolors with a note for the artist I never knew you were. Today, on my 70th birthday, I sit alone but not lonely. The photograph in my hands shows a different Mary Thompson than the one who now paints and plays guitar, who meets friends for coffee and occasionally dances with Howard on Friday nights. Doris promised to come by later with cake. Howard mentioned stopping in with flowers. Our friendship has blossomed into a gentle companionship that surprises us both. Sarah called this morning, and Joseph's family is driving over for dinner tomorrow. Michael sent a gift that arrived yesterday, a leather-bound journal with a note. For your stories, Mom. They deserve to be told. The greatest irony of my life is that the abandonment I once thought would destroy me actually saved me. Had my children continued to see me only as their aging mother, a responsibility to be managed, I might never have discovered the woman beyond those roles. The pain of being pushed aside forced me to stand on my own, to ask, who is Mary Thompson when no one needs her anymore? The answer is still evolving. I am a painter of modest talent but boundless enthusiasm, a novice guitarist who finds joy in simple melodies, a friend who listens well because she knows the pain of not being heard, a mother who loves deeply but no longer defines herself solely through that connection. In a drawer nearby, I keep another photograph, one taken at the community center's art show. In it, I stand beside one of my paintings, smiling with a confidence my younger self never knew. That day, Sarah whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Words I'd said to her countless times but had never expected to hear directed at me. I rise from my chair, feeling the familiar ache in my knees but welcoming the movement. There's cake to be eaten, friends to embrace, candles to blow out. There's a journal to fill with the story I'm still writing, the unexpected, beautiful final chapter of Mary Thompson's life, the one where she finally, truly lives. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Mary's journey from heartbreak to self-discovery reminds us that it's never too late to find your voice. Subscribe now to follow more stories of remarkable transformations, and share this video if Mary's courage resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of your true story.